Welcome to Just Love Live. I am your host, Luz Tavarez. Thank you for tuning in to our monthly show where we will discuss major issues facing everyday New Yorkers, from housing and food insufficiency to transportation and public safety. And we will also look at how Catholic Charities New York and the greater human services community is responding to these needs. This is our inaugural show, so I hope you will continue to join us every month for these important conversations. My day job involves overseeing the policy priorities of Catholic Charities, so we will try to look at things through that lens. Catholic Charities is the largest social service organization in New York and the leader for over 100 years in providing help and creating hope for New Yorkers in need. We deliver critical human services to the neglected child, the homeless family, the immigrant and refugee, the person with special needs, and the hungry senior are among those for whom we provide help, always with compassion and dignity. We work hard to meet the needs of fellow New Yorkers, non-Catholic and Catholic alike, through a federation of 90 human services agencies through 10 counties of New York City and the lower Hudson Valley. This first show, I have two guests which I am very excited about. The first is Monsignor Kevin Sullivan, Executive Director of Catholic Charities, and someone who I have had the pleasure to interview on his own radio show, Just Love. See the relationship there? Monsignor Kevin Sullivan is the Executive Director of Catholic Charities New York. He has served as a member of the New York City Speakers Commission on Homelessness, the Public Policy Committee of the New York State Catholic Conference, the New York City Mayor's Commission for Economic Opportunity, the Governor's Human Services Policy Transition Advisory Committee, and the New York City Redistricting Committee. He earned a master's degree in public administration at the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, and has a doctorate in public administration from NYU. Monsignor Sullivan was born in the Bronx and raised in Yonkers, and has been Executive Director of Catholic Charities New York for almost 25 years. Welcome, Monsignor Kevin Sullivan.
Luz, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you for being here. Monsignor, as the Executive Director of Catholic Charities New York, and since this is our first show, tell us a little bit about Catholic Charities and how it fits into the greater human services landscape.
Well, Catholic Charities for over 100 years has been really at the center of New York. And, you know, I'm a New Yorker. And one of the things I really think is so wonderful about New York is that we are a welcoming place. We're a caring place. Oh, yes, we can be a little gruff. We can be a little quick. But that's only because we want to welcome you quicker and we want to be caring quicker. So what Catholic Charities is one of those organizations which is kind of founded in our kind of gospel Christian Catholic values, but serving people of all religions, saying that we want to be part of a New York that is welcoming and that is caring. So what Catholic Charities does is kind of try to figure out how our neighbors need a helping hand in a variety of different ways. And we've been doing it for over 100 years. And, you know, we try
You look good for 100, Monsignor.
Well, you know, and so do you. So, but we do it in a way that we try not to be big, even though we do a lot. We try to do it in a way which is not bureaucratic, but we try to do it in a way which is personal. And I hope that, you know, many, many more times than we fail, that we succeed in being a caring neighbor to some of the most vulnerable and hurting of our New York neighbors.
And Catholic Charities is a federation of 90 agencies. So tell us a little bit about that dynamic, how you relate to all of these agencies.
Well, we're a federation of agencies is because there are so many different gifts, so many different needs, so many different stories and histories about how people, you know, began to help their neighbors in need. So, you know, going back almost 200 years now, primarily groups of women religious, you know, said, hey, these are kids who have a need. Let's kind of come together. And so, you know, an agency like the New York Foundling was established in the 19th century, and a group of Dominican sisters, you know, in Rockland County, they said, we have some children. So what happened as Catholic Charities came to be right after World War I, there were already all of these different charitable groups, and they were doing great work. And so what Catholic Charities said, we're not going to just merge them or mesh them all together. Let's let them develop their own individual charisms, their own individual gifts, their own individual programs. But let's bring it together under the umbrella of the different Catholic charities of the Archdiocese of New York. And that's our strength, that it's decentralized, they're centrally managed, they have their own staff, their own volunteers, and yet we all share that value, the Catholic value, and we help each other in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it gets a little messy, as with a family, because all the kids aren't always doing the same thing. But at the end of the day, it's the way that we are embedded in almost every neighborhood and community in the New York metropolitan area.
That's wonderful. And in a little bit, we're going to have one of those Federation agencies featured here as our second guest. But Monsignor, we're quickly approaching the holidays, and I know this is a busy time for Catholic Charities. You have two major events coming up. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, we do. We have one event which, to one extent, is kind of a sad event. Okay, and why is it a sad event? Pope Francis has raised up the needs of the poor. And so he declared kind of a day in November as World Day of the Poor. So what we're going to do here in New York, with the help of Cardinal Dolan, we're going to display on Fifth Avenue, which is one of the probably wealthier parts of New York, food that we're going to bring during that Thanksgiving week to different neighborhoods, to different communities, because some of our neighbors won't have a decent Thanksgiving meal if it's not for the help that we give. And why do I say it's sad? Because, our world has a lot of riches, but they're not always distributed in a fair way. And so there are hundreds of millions of people who are poor, and that's sad. Mm-hmm. But the Pope raises us up, and what Catholic Charities says is, all right, we want to make sure that our poorer neighbors are not forgotten. So we're going to, on Fifth Avenue, bless some food and talk about how we're taking care of our neighbors during Thanksgiving.
And give us that date.
You put me on the spot. I don't know. Look it up on
November
your calendar.
19th.
I don't know. It's the Sunday before Thanksgiving.
Monsignor, and speaking of Thanksgiving, Catholic Charities each year has a major food distribution program. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, let me tell you, one of the things that I'm proudest about, that food distribution, we have volunteers who come and who help us. And one of the groups that is really helpful to us is a group called Catholic Renewal. And these are really high-powered professionals who involved in different financial services, legal issues, primarily when companies need restructuring or bankruptcy. But they have said that hungry New Yorkers are critically important. So some of that group usually helps us with preparing the food that is going to be distributed. And we use our Kennedy Center in Harlem as the hub for that. And from there, trucks come, they pick up pounds and pounds of food, thousands of meals that go out to all parts of New York. And that's really a special day because we want to make sure that our neighbors can also celebrate Thanksgiving the way that, fortunately, most New Yorkers can.
So that's actually a perfect segue to my other question, because I wanted to ask you about volunteers. How does Catholic Charities rely on volunteers to help provide some services?
Well, two ways. And I think one of the ways that people may not think about volunteers is we want to make sure that our agencies are well run. And so we have boards of directors that they have the responsibility to bring their brains, their insights, and their money to help those agencies do it well. And they all volunteer. So we have thousands of volunteers who give their time to hold our programs accountable, to make sure they're good quality. The other way is, I think, the way that many people are very familiar with. Many of our food pantries, they're not staffed. They may have some staff that do some organizing, coordinating, but the people who are giving out the food are oftentimes neighborhood volunteers, people in our parishes. So that's how people kind of get involved in Catholic Charities. And we also have mentoring programs, tutoring programs, English conversational. New York, we have a lot of newcomers who want to learn English. So we have people who volunteer to help them learn English.
And I'm assuming you're always looking for volunteers.
We're always looking for volunteers, and we think some of our volunteers are pretty special and pretty important because it does require commitment. You have to be willing to commit, because if you're working with somebody, you can't let them down. They're depending on you, so it does require a little bit of sacrifice.
Sure. Monsignor, this is a particularly difficult time for many people right now. We're just coming off of COVID. We're dealing with wars. We're dealing with hate crimes and things of that nature, inflation. Tell me a little bit about what that means for Catholic Charities. How do you, as an agency providing human services, how do you deal with this? And what are some of the things you're seeing?
Well, we deal with it in a variety of different ways, but one of the main things we do, in the midst of all the hate, the divisiveness, all of that, we try to stay laser focused on meeting genuine human needs of our neighbors. If you focus on the humanity of our neighbors, then you can't avoid the chaos and the darkness and the anger. But if you stay focused on human needs, that's where what we do as Catholic Charities. And that's so what we try to do that even more intensely in the midst of the suffering, the pain, the anger, the evil that is in our world.
Would you say that any of your services have grown in the last several months? More people are looking for those types of services?
Well, one of the things which we already talked about is food. And the reason is twofold. Inflation. That food prices have probably gone through the roof more so than anything else. And that hits in two ways, because when we get food or we have to buy food from a food bank or place, the dollars that people give us go less. People's food during the month goes less because they can buy less. Everybody's telling me now, I don't like eggs, but everybody tells me the price of eggs is going through the roof. Now, for me, not so important, but
right.
For other things. And so therefore, people in trying to pay the rent, they kind of have to give up food earlier in the month. And so they come more often or more frequently to our food programs.
Sure. Any final challenges that you want to mention to our audience that you're facing?
Well, we're facing the problem that, while volunteers are great, we need staff to do the job. And, we think we have a very good place to work, focused on mission. We try to treat our employees fairly, with respect. We compensate as best as we can with benefits. So we need people who want to help us help our neighbors. So any of our listeners who think they might want to work and help their neighbors, we'd welcome to have them come ask about working with us at Catholic Charities.
That's great. Thank you so much, Monsignor.
Thank you.
It's great having you on the show. Thank you for being our first guest. Next, we're going to have Jeremy Kaplan join you on stage, and we're going to have a conversation. But first, let's take a break. Welcome back. Our second guest is Jeremy Kaplan, the Executive Director of Encore Community Services, one of Catholic Charities' 90 partner agencies. Jeremy joined Encore in 2018 as the Executive Director. Prior to his role there, he served as Senior Director at Phipps Neighborhoods, overseeing 25 programs serving more than 4,500 children and their families in the South Bronx. Jeremy is also the founding principal of Broome Street Academy, specializing in meeting the needs of homeless students and those in the child welfare system. He serves on the New York City Department for the Aging Senior Advisory Board, the Strategy and Priority Committee of the Human Services Council, and Senator Kristen Gillibrand's Work Group on Aging. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you for having me.
So tell our viewers a little bit about the work of Encore.
Encore Community Services has been around for 45 years. We were born in St. Malachi's Church, right in the heart of the theater district. We've been we've been a proud member of the Catholic Charities Federation for, I think, that entire time, for decades. We were founded by a group of Dominican nuns that you were talking about earlier, and neighbors, theater owners, and union owners at the time, in response to the profound need among older adults, particularly the homelessness, the social isolation that older New Yorkers face, and hunger, which has only grown and exacerbated over the years as the population has grown.
Sure, and you do significant work with seniors. What are some of the challenges in meeting the needs of that community?
Oh gosh, well, the senior population in New York City is growing exponentially. We are becoming an older city. Older adults outnumber younger adults. Well, it's it's a badge of honor. It's a badge of honor growing older in this city. But as we get older, we become isolated, and isolation can lead to loneliness, and loneliness is lethal. It's the equivalent of smoking several packs of cigarettes a day, has the same impact on your health. And unfortunately, resources to help feed older adults who are hungry, to help house older adults, are limited. We are an extremely youth-centric city. So unfortunately, a lot of resources are directed in other places, and we really need to focus on both ends of the continuum, throughout, and support one another as we get older throughout life.
And I know just before we started rolling, we were talking a little bit about the kind of aging infrastructure in New York City and how that's a challenge for seniors. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, at Encore, we operate older adult centers, housing, and we have a robust home delivery meal program where we are scratch cooking and delivering over 500,000 meals a year on the west side of Manhattan to homebound older adults. Most of those meals, or I should say many of those meals, are delivered by volunteers. Catholic Charities sources hundreds of volunteers for us every single year. We could not do the work that we do to deliver meals throughout the west side of Manhattan without Catholic Charities volunteers. But where we don't have volunteers, we do hire staff, as Monsignor mentioned, and our staff go above and beyond. And this city has an infrastructure problem. I remember several months back, I was doing a meal delivery route with our head driver. His name is George, and we came across, I think it was a NYCHA building, and the buzzer wasn't working, which is an all too common issue. And the person that we were trying to deliver to lived way up, I don't know, 7th, 8th floor. And when we got there, she was waiting in the lobby. And this woman was probably in her late 80s, early 90s, very, very frail, right? But had such a strong heart and spirit and greeted us with the biggest smile. And George said, "What are you doing? Why are you waiting down here? I'm supposed to go up." And she said, I knew the buzzer wasn't working and you would have a hard time getting in. And I needed the food. And so I thought I would wait down here for you. Wow. George ended up having to carry her up 8 flights of stairs because she wasn't able to make it back up on her own. And this is the type of challenge that not just staff, but volunteers face. And they do it rain or shine, regardless of what kind of catastrophe is happening in the city that might clog up the streets. We're out there delivering meals.
And Senior, this is something you can identify with too. You just told us that one of the biggest challenges Catholic Charities is facing is related to food.
It certainly is. And, the fact that so many meals are delivered at home is just fantastic, because it breaks down some of that social isolation, even if it's only a volunteer showing up, once a week or something like that. It makes that person feel, connected to there. So food is just critically important. And I think with a lot of our food programs, and I think, Jeremy, you can speak to this, I'm so pleased that in the past 20, 25 years, there's been an increased emphasis on the nutritional value of those meals. It's not just filling people up. And that's why so many partners are so necessary to make sure it's a decent meal, not just a meal that kind of fills people.
Oh, it's a highly nutritious meal that meets 1/3 of your daily caloric intake needs, and we do need help to get the other 2/3 into people's bodies, right? Which is why it's so important to have volunteers and to have people who contribute to our cause. And Monsignor, yes, we're filling people nutritionally, but we're also filling their spirit, right? By providing companionship. Isolation and loneliness is the issue that, the other issue in addition to hunger that we're trying to deal with at Encore. And we have volunteers who serve as friendly visitors. So we match them up with older adults. It's supposed to be a 6-month commitment between the volunteer and the older adult.
Right.
It often becomes a lifetime friendship. And like you said, it's not just a transactional meal delivery. It's a knock on the door. How are you doing today? Is there anything I can get for you? And I can't tell you how many times we've had a volunteer knock on the door and somebody was in some kind of either mental health or physical distress. And were it not for the volunteer, no one else would have come that day. And so they are able to call a case manager, or God forbid, they call 911. But it really is a lifeline for so many thousands of older adults.
So Jeremy, you told us about the challenges of isolation and food insufficiency. What are some of the other challenges that you're seeing and that the agency is trying to meet head on?
We are seeing a tremendous spike in the number of unhoused older adults who are coming into our older adult centers. We've always had unhoused older adults come in. We're a safe space. We're a place where you can hang out and be. It's a very familiar place throughout the day. But as of late, over the last year or so, we've seen numbers like we haven't seen before. And so there are issues around, first of all, training staff and volunteers. How do you meet the very unique and special needs for people who are in that situation, right? And then there is such a dearth of housing options, particularly for low-income older adults. So that's a major challenge that's gotten worse since the pandemic and over the course of the last year or so.
And we've heard often that some of the challenges in dealing with the homeless population, are issues of mental health. Are those issues that this community, the aging community you're dealing with, are facing as well?
Absolutely. There are unmet mental health needs, but homelessness is such a complicated issue with so many different variables. It's a conflation of mental health resources, access to services, and it's I can't point to one particular reason. And I think as a city, this really is probably one of our most critical challenges right now throughout the lifespan, but especially among older adults.
Sure. So you told us you have wonderful volunteers that visit some of the aging adults you serve in their apartments. How else do you use volunteers, and could you use more for our listeners?
Well, it's funny. I heard Monsignor Sullivan talking about volunteers in a way that often we don't think about. But in our boards, our board of directors is a volunteer board, and the amount of time and resources and intellectual resources and financial resources that our boards support our organization with is just tremendous. And we do have a relatively new board member at Encore Community Services who was a junior board member at Catholic Charities, and she came over to join our board. So that's one way. But in addition to that, our volunteers are serving meals. They're delivering meals up and down the West Side. They're packing meals. They're making friendly calls. They're teaching classes. We have a volunteer who does a weekly fused glass jewelry class.
Wow.
And it's one of our most popular classes at our Aging Through Arts Center. So the sky's really the limit. And I do encourage folks who are interested in volunteering to consider volunteering at your local older adult center. There are 300 older adult centers throughout New York City. And if you want to be in the heart of Times Square, you can volunteer at Encore Community Services, which is a Catholic Charities affiliate. So we are always welcoming volunteers.
That's wonderful. You heard that. So tell us a little bit about how many people you serve a year.
We have about 3,500 registered members. And the key word there is registered.
Right. What does that mean?
It means these are people who filled out a form, showed ID, and that ID went into the system. But then there are quite frankly, countless other people who we see on a daily basis who don't go through all those hoops, right? So I'd say between 3,500 and over 5,000 older New Yorkers a year are a part of the Encore Community Services community.
And would you say if budget was no issue, you could serve how many more, perhaps?
Oh, I was just mentioning to Monsignor, we renovated our kitchen recently, and we have the capability of cooking and delivering 45,000 meals a week. And I guarantee you,
Wow.
we could serve all 45,000 of those. Were funding available for it.
And volunteers?
And volunteers, yes, and volunteers and staff.
That
Yes.
is amazing. That is
Yes.
amazing. You're doing great work, Jeremy, and your agency happens to be one of my favorites. But tell our viewers a little bit more how they could help.
Oh, well, Catholic Charities has provided Encore with critical funding over the last few years. A good number of our casework positions are co-funded through Catholic Charities, a public-private partnership between the city of New York. So I would say donate. The city of New York pays us 80 cents on the dollar, for the contracts that we run. We gotta fill in that gap through private contributions. So donate to Catholic Charities, donate to Encore Community Services, and then in addition to donating, come volunteer.
That's great. That's like a perfect commercial. So Jeremy, if you had to leave just our viewers with one last thing, what do you want them to know about Encore?
It's not so much what I would want them to know about Encore. It's something I would like for folks to think about in terms of our city. Because when I came to New York City as a young 20-something-year-old guy from the South.
5 years ago.
Like 3 years ago. No. I had no concept of how many older adults are living in the shadows in our city. You walk down the street and you look at the walk-ups and the high rises, and there are tens of thousands. There's 1.8 million people who are over the age of 60 living in our city, and 1 out of every 4 of them is food insecure, right? Take care of your neighbors.
Wow.
Take care of your neighbors.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you again, Monsignor. There you go. This was our first Just Love Live show. Thank you to my guests again, Monsignor Sullivan, Jeremy Kaplan, Encore. Thank you so much to the production team here. And thank you for joining me on this first episode of Just Love Live. Please join us next time.